Have you ever wished humanity could just, well, do the exact opposite of what's damaging? I mean, what if there was a systematic way to flip harmful behaviors into something genuinely beneficial? Not just for us as individuals, but, for whole societies, even the planet. Today on The Deep Dive, we're getting into something really profound. It's this idea called the opposite world paradigm. Basically, it imagines a state where human thinking and actions are like intentionally inverted from things we know are detrimental. And this isn't just some philosophical daydream. We're going to unpack the science behind it, look at history, and critically, how AI might actually help us figure it out.
That's right. And as we dive in, you'll see this idea isn't pulled out of thin air. It's got roots in established psychology, deep philosophical thought, even hints in physics, actually. What's really exciting, I think, is how artificial intelligence could take this from being, well, speculation to something we can actually study with data, potentially even model what this kind of shift might mean for human flourishing.
Okay, so let's unpack that core concept then. Opposite world. It means systematically reversing harmful thoughts and actions. But you stressed it's not just hitting an opposite button, right? That sounds too simple. Can you clarify that? What's the nuance there?
Absolutely. The key term we use is constructive antithesis. It's crucial. So, for example, if you have widespread conflict, right? That's damaging. The opposite isn't just no war. That's just an absence. It's the active, collaborative push for resolution, for finding common ground, building mutual understanding.
Okay.
Or think about excessive consumption. The opposite isn't just being frugal, necessarily. It's moving towards something like a regenerative circular economy, one that really prioritizes sustainability, looking after resources. It's about building something better, fundamentally, not just stopping the bad thing.
Right. That makes a lot more sense. Building a better alternative, not just flipping a switch, because I can immediately see pitfalls.
Yeah.
Like a really naive inversion could go wrong fast. Your example was if over-tolerance somehow became the problem, well, just flipping to intolerance is obviously just as bad, maybe worse.
Exactly. You've hit the nail on the head. That highlights the critical need for careful thought. Even some psychological tricks, like reverse psychology you mentioned earlier. They can work sometimes, sure. But they can also backfire badly or feel manipulative and damage trust. So it really underlines why you need a sophisticated, context-aware definition of opposite. It has to aim for something constructive, consistently, not just negation.
Okay, that brings us to the really interesting part. How could we actually do this? What's the psychological basis? How can we genuinely shift our thinking in such a deep way? Forget the tricks for a second.
Well, there are definitely established psychological approaches that point in this direction. You mentioned reverse psychology, sort of prompting the opposite action to get what you want. Like the classic, you probably can't eat all that broccoli to get a kid interested.
Right.
There are also things called paradoxical interventions used in therapy sometimes. These can involve encouraging someone to actually continue a problematic behavior, which sounds weird, but it can sometimes, surprisingly, shift the perspective on it very quickly and lead to change.
That's quite clever, playing on how we react.
Yeah.
But what about something more direct, more conscious for cultivating this opposite thinking ourselves day to day?
Yeah, and that's precisely where something like cognitive restructuring comes into play. It's a core technique, really. It helps people identify, challenge, and then reframe those unhelpful negative thinking patterns. Like all or nothing thinking, or catastrophizing everything, or overgeneralizing from one bad experience. It essentially asks you to be a detective about your own thoughts, to ask yourself, okay, is this thought based on my feelings right now, or is it based on actual facts? Or what's the evidence against this thought being true? It's a very direct way to consciously reverse damaging cognitive habits and replace them with more, well, rational and constructive ones.
That sounds like a really practical tool for individuals.
Oh.
Okay, so if we zoom out from the individual, are there bigger, maybe philosophical or even scientific ideas that echo this, that help us grasp opposite world thinking on a grander scale?
Oh, absolutely. There are quite a few parallels. One really key concept from philosophy is dialectical thinking. This is all about examining and reconciling ideas that seem to oppose each other or contradict each other to get to a deeper, richer understanding. It pushes you beyond that rigid either-or mindset, which, some neuroscientists think might stem from older brain regions, just categorizing things as safe or risky. Instead, it encourages embracing both-hand truths.
Like the example, I love you and I'm really upset with you right now. Giving space for both, not having to pick one, That's a good one.
Exactly that, holding both as valid. This kind of thinking fosters more open-mindedness, it helps with complex problem solving, it can really spark creativity. And then there's the broader philosophical idea of duality. Things like yin and yang, light and dark, the idea that these opposing forces don't just exist, they might actually depend on each other. They coexist. So opposite thinking in this light isn't about wiping one side out, it's about finding a dynamic balance, understanding their interplay.
And didn't you say this even pops up in science? Something about Niels Bohr and physics.
Yes, exactly. In quantum mechanics, Bohr's concept of complementarity, it's fascinating. It basically says that certain pairs of properties, the classic example is light behaving as both a wave and a particle.
Yeah.
Well, you can't observe both aspects at the exact same time. But you absolutely need both descriptions for a complete understanding of what light is. It's a fantastic analogy, really, for why we might need to integrate seemingly opposing perspectives to get a fuller picture of reality, like needing both sides of a coin.
That really is mind-bending when you think about it. Applying that to human thought, it suggests that things that seem contradictory might actually hold a deeper truth together.
Precisely. And think about how logical paradoxes, in math and logic, historically, they haven't just been problems. They've often been catalysts. They force us to rethink our assumptions, leading to huge shifts in understanding, totally new paradigms, more robust systems. So maybe embracing the inherent paradox of this opposite thinking idea is actually a necessary step for us, for humanity, to break through some of our own cognitive limits and, well, evolve.
Okay, this is all sounding incredibly complex, which I guess naturally leads us to AI, artificial intelligence. How exactly does AI fit into this? How can it possibly help us understand, let alone model, something as huge and profound as an opposite world?
Well, AI is kind of uniquely suited for this challenge, actually. Its ability to process just enormous amounts of data, to spot really complex patterns that humans would miss, and crucially, to simulate incredibly intricate systems. That capability allows AI to potentially lift this whole concept from being, just philosophical speculation into the realm of data-informed scientific inquiry. AI can give us a sort of meta-level view on human cognition and how societies work that we've just never had before.
So AI acts like a superpowered magnifying glass and maybe a simulator for how we behave, but on a massive scale.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. There are cutting-edge AI models. Some are even designed specifically to be like virtual labs for psychology. They get trained on millions, literally millions, of recorded human decisions and psychological tests. So they can simulate our decision-making with pretty remarkable accuracy, predict behavior, spot common pitfalls or biases in thinking. They could genuinely revolutionize cognitive science, giving us a much richer understanding of how we process information and interact with each other.
Okay, so understanding is one thing, but can AI actually help change or refine human behavior or our thinking patterns?
Yes, potentially. There's some interesting research on what's called the AI assessment effect. Basically, just knowing that an AI tool is involved or assessing you can subtly influence how people behave. They might say, emphasize their analytical skills more.
Interesting.
But more importantly, AI can be designed deliberately to help us. It can audit algorithms for accuracy, make sure diverse data is included, and it can actively promote critical thinking in humans. Imagine an AI that could generate counterarguments to your own viewpoint, or even point out its own potential flaws or limitations. That creates a kind of collaborative process that could really enhance human critical thinking, which is absolutely vital for an opposite world idea, right? Helping us overcome those deeply ingrained, unhelpful thought patterns.
But, a tool that powerful, it immediately brings up big questions, doesn't it? If we're talking about AI influencing how we think, how do we make absolutely sure we're not accidentally creating new kinds of control or manipulation? What are the essential guardrails here?
That is a profoundly important point. Yes. The risk of biases or inaccuracies being baked into the AI models is very real, especially if they're trained on data that's incomplete or doesn't represent everyone fairly.
Right, it can just reinforce existing problems.
Exactly. It could make inequities worse. So any development and use of AI for something like the opposite world must have transparency and accountability front and center. We need constant monitoring to ensure the AI itself isn't causing new harms or enabling manipulation. Robust, diverse data is key to trying to prevent unintended negative outcomes for any particular group.
Okay, so AIs are incredibly powerful but needs very careful watching guide. Got it. Let's shift focus now to the science within us. What's going on cognitively, biologically, that actually makes this kind of opposite thinking even possible for humans?
The absolute foundation here is neuroplasticity. It's the brain's amazing ability to literally rewire itself based on learning and experience. Every single new thing you learn, every new thought you have, it physically alters your brain's organization. Slightly, but it does. You know the phrase, neurons that fire together wire together.
Yeah.
That captures the core principle. Repeatedly activating certain pathways strengthens those connections. That's how new behaviors, new thought patterns get encoded. Think about what that means. Our brains aren't fixed hardware. They're constantly adapting, constantly changing, which implies that the very physical structure of our minds can be shaped, cultivated to embody this opposite thinking. It's not just a nice idea. Our biology actually supports it.
That is incredibly hopeful, isn't it? Knowing our brains are literally built to change means we're not just stuck with bad habits or damaging patterns forever.
Yeah.
So what psychological processes help us tap into that neuroplasticity? How do we consciously direct it towards opposite thinking?
Well, two critical ones are metacognition and self-regulation. Metacognition is basically thinking about your thinking, being aware of it, reflecting on it, directing it.
Okay.
So people who are good at self-regulation, they can spot those unhelpful thought patterns in themselves, like maybe they notice they always jump to the worst conclusion, or they only look for evidence that confirms what they already believe. And then crucially, they can consciously choose to use a different strategy. Step back, observe the thought, question it. It's about gaining that ability to step outside your own immediate thoughts. And, unlike AI, which can be relentlessly optimized, human metacognition also has these unique quirks in how we handle rewards and punishments, which adds another layer.
That ability to observe your own thoughts, almost like from a distance, that seems absolutely key.
Yeah.
But are there universal tendencies in how humans think? Things that suggest this opposite thinking could be applied broadly across different cultures?
Yes, definitely. Psychologists have identified many common cognitive biases, these sort of systematic ways our minds can lead us astray sometimes. Things like the status quo bias, or our tendency to prefer things just stay the same, or loss aversion, feeling the pain of a loss much more strongly than the pleasure of an equal game.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that these kinds of biases show up pretty consistently across diverse populations suggests we do share a kind of common cognitive architecture, and that means it could potentially be targeted for change. And while genetics certainly plays a role, there are gene variants linked to how intensely we perceive negative things. For instance, there's also the whole field of behavioral epigenetics, which shows that environmental factors like your upbringing, your experiences, can actually change how your genes are expressed, and sometimes reversibly. That opens the door to the possibility that societal efforts, big shifts in culture, could potentially influence these epigenetic patterns over generations, reinforcing positive changes.
Wow, that's powerful. So, okay, we have the biological capacity, the psychological tools. Let's try and picture it. How would this opposite world actually look in practice? How would it reshape society, our collective behaviors, our norms?
Well, it would fundamentally require rethinking and re-engineering how groups work, how we interact collectively. The goal would be to actively promote pro-social behaviors and find ways to counteract those collective actions that are harmful. Social norms, those unwritten rules about how we're supposed to behave, they need to be intentionally shaped to encourage and support this kind of constructive opposite thinking. It fits with ideas about cultural evolution, how societies change over time through internal processes. Even small shifts, if they catch on, can lead to really significant transformations down the line, like a sort of social butterfly effect.
And we have seen humanity make some absolutely massive shifts throughout history, haven't we?
Yeah.
Turning away from things that were once considered normal.
We really have. Those historical examples are incredibly important because they show it can be done. They demonstrate our capacity to reverse practices that were deeply, deeply embedded and considered totally normal, even morally right at the time. Think about the abolition of slavery, women gaining the right to vote, the civil rights movement, the fight for LGBTQ+ rights. These were monumental struggles against entrenched systems.
Yeah.
Or even more specific things, like the global campaigns against practices like female genital mutilation or child marriage, or how foot binding was eradicated in China after centuries. These aren't just blips. They show a remarkable, it's sometimes slow and difficult human capacity for collective self-correction, often driven by changing ethics and people demanding better.
So in this hypothetical opposite world, how would leadership need to change? And governance? And how could AI actually help with that transformation?
Ideally, leaders themselves would need to embody these principles of constructive opposite thinking. They'd need to actively promote it. Ethical leadership, Leaders with integrity who are genuinely open to feedback, even critical feedback, that would be absolutely crucial. A leader truly committed to this would, for instance, deliberately seek out dissenting opinions to fight their own confirmation bias. They prioritize long-term societal flourishing over easy short-term wins.
Right.
And AI could be a powerful support tool here. It could help reveal hidden biases in decision-making, model the likely long-term impacts of different policies, predict potential unintended consequences. It could even help facilitate broader public discussion and collective action, maybe helping bridge divides across social networks.
And what about our connection to the environment, to nature? How would that shift in an opposite world?
Well, if we identify widespread environmental destruction as a profoundly damaging behavior pattern, which I think most would agree it is, then opposite thinking would have to lead towards a deeply embedded culture of conservation and stewardship. There are philosophical traditions like natural law theory that argue human flourishing is fundamentally tied to the health of the planet. We can't thrive if our environment is collapsing.
Makes sense.
So an opposite world would likely embrace views that see humanity as intrinsically part of nature, not separate from or dominant over it. Biocentric or ecocentric perspectives. The rules in that context become those inherent principles that lead to flourishing for the whole system, aligning human life with a healthy, sustainable planet.
This sounds incredibly positive, truly transformative,
Yeah.
but I can't help but think about the challenges. Such a radical shift. There must be major hurdles and ethical dilemmas, like what happens with societal reactions? If you redefine damaging thinking, does that mean some people automatically get labeled as deviant or problematic?
That's a really critical point and a potential danger, yes. If you establish new norms around thinking and behavior, those who don't conform or can't adapt quickly might be marginalized or stigmatized. Society's response to this would need to be managed incredibly carefully to avoid just swapping one form of coercion for another. Maybe principles from restorative justice could offer a framework here, focusing on repairing harm, understanding the root causes, and reintegrating people rather than just punishing difference. That aligns better with transforming negative patterns into positive ones.
Okay, and what about the ethics of actually promoting this change, especially if it feels mandatory? You mentioned nudges earlier, those subtle pushes to influence behavior. Where's the line?
Yeah, this hits on fundamental questions about individual autonomy versus the collective good. Just because a policy aims to promote healthier or better behavior doesn't automatically make it ethical. You have to weigh the overall well-being, consider unintended side effects. And with nudges, if they work by subtly exploiting psychological biases that people aren't even aware of, you could argue that undermines their agency, their ability to choose freely.
Right, it feels a bit manipulative.
It can. So an opposite world framework would need to be incredibly careful about this. Transparency is key. Prioritizing genuine well-being and informed consent over just getting compliance is crucial. Otherwise, you risk eroding trust and creating backlash.
So let's say a society actually tries to move in this direction. Who really stands to benefit, and who might? Well, who might lose out in this transition?
Well, the potential benefits for society as a whole are immense, right? Less conflict, better environmental health, improved collective well-being. Things that align with, say, minimizing suffering overall. But let's be realistic. A shift of this magnitude would inevitably cause massive disruption for some people in some sectors. Think about industries, economic models, power structures that currently rely on or profit from behaviors we might define as damaging, unsustainable practices, maybe conflict-driven economies, misinformation industries. Those groups would face huge disruption, potential loss of wealth, status, power. So the massive ethical challenge becomes, how do you manage that transition fairly? How do you support those who are negatively impacted, offer pathways for adaptation rather than just steamrolling them? That's a huge question.
Wow. Okay, this deep dive has really opened up this opposite world idea. It's clearly way more than just a simple concept. It's this complex, potentially AI-supported scientific investigation into systematically cultivating thinking and behavior that's, well, the constructive opposite of what harms us, rooted in things like neuroplasticity. Our brain's ability to change our capacity for metacognition, thinking about our thinking, and these deep philosophical ideas like dialectical thinking. And we've seen how crucial AI could be for analyzing and modeling it, while also acknowledging those historical examples that show humanity can make profound collective shifts. It gives you a sense that it's not totally impossible.
Exactly. And it's so important to remember it wouldn't be some static, perfect utopia. If it were achievable, it would be a dynamic state, constant effort, continuous work to identify damaging patterns and then figure out the constructive way to invert them. Its success would really hang on our collective ability for self-awareness, for that dialectical reasoning, holding complexities, maybe even for collective altruism, all potentially amplified and guided by AI, but always needing to navigate those really deep ethical questions we touched on.
So, to leave everyone with something to chew on, if this opposite world isn't about just eliminating one side of a pair, good, bad, right, wrong, but actually using the tension between opposites to spark new ideas and solutions, what seemingly contradictory truths, maybe in your own life or that you see in society, could you start to embrace? Could holding both sides actually unlock a deeper understanding or maybe reveal a totally new path forward?
This is DigitView.